Mr. Shivsagar, Mr. Mukherjee, trustees of this august museum, distinguished members of the Welcome Trust, Miss Memis, forgive me if I've forgotten some names, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, please put this on. Let me thank you for making me the chief guest. I'm not quite sure why you did so. For the simple reason that I do not practice traditional Indian medicine. I practice what I may call, currently called, biomedicine, current biomedicine. But I have a passion for history and also for the history of medicine. And that includes, of course, the history of Ayurveda. I shall therefore speak mainly on the history of Ayurveda so that you have a better perspective and a broader perspective of what you're about to see in this exhibit. Tabiat is, of course, health. It's derived from the Old English Hoelth, H-O-E-L-T-H. And how would you define good health? It's a system of complete physical, mental, social well-being, not just the absence of disease or infirmity. Question arises when tabiat goes wrong, awry. Tabiat is really bad. It is then that medicine steps in. And I've oft wondered, when did medicine indeed come into the world? I think medicine came into the world with the awakening of consciousness in man. In other words, it came into the world pari passu with man. The roots of medicine, modern medicine included, lie in magic. In the shaman, for example, who exorcised the demons that entered through the various orifices of the human body and wreaked havoc within body and mind. Sometimes he did this by fair means and sometimes by foul. And then came religion into medicine. So we have a combination of religion and medicine merged together. Best seen perhaps in the history of Egypt. And then came empiric medicine. And then came scientific medicine. And most medicine in any part of the world today is a mixture of empiricism and science. Unquestionably, the most important traditional medical aspect in this country, or the medical system in this country, is Ayurveda. The origin of Ayurveda antedates the formation of this nation, India, by perhaps a couple of millennia, and therefore is not circumscribed or set within its geographical boundaries. India, in the context of the history of medicine, occupies or denotes large areas of lands or regions in South Asia and perhaps also Central Asia. This old tradition stayed for many, many centuries, millennia, but there were outside traditions which trickled into this country, which became integrated into its tradition and became part of its medical culture. The first of these was Unani. The Unani, by the way, is derived from the word Ionian, which is Greek. It's a Greco-Arabic form of medicine. It was brought into the country by Arabs. And it was really the main system of medicine during Mughal rule. It is a form of alchemy, trying to purify metals and use them for medicinal purposes. It also used the plants and herbs, etc., for treatment purposes, and borrowed some from Ayurveda as well. In fact, Ayurveda and Unani sort of intermingled with each other and fed each other their own knowledge. There were others also that came into the country, like homeopathy, naturopathy, and several other pathis, which I'm not going to talk about. But I would like to mention yoga, which is a wholly indigenous system of knowledge, which to start with had its moorings in spiritual teachings and in philosophy, but at present has turned its focus to a health-centric way, so that you have people doing asanas and people doing meditation so that they restore health or they keep good health. And you have folk medicine, which I think antedates all great systems of medicine altogether. Probably dates from the time when man was a hunter and then took to agriculture and learned from the fields, from the plants, from the trees, from animals, what was best for him to keep his health. And you will see that today in India, where folk medicine is extremely common. It starts at home, where it's the grandfather or grandmother who tells you what to do when you have a cold or a cough or an indigestion or a fever or a rash. So many of these so-called home remedies are folk medicines, partly derived from Ayurveda and partly derived from folklore. And then you have the man who goes into the street, who meets the Vaid and asks him for help, or the Hakim, or the herbalist, or the hypnotist, or the palmist, or the man who tells his health from a pack of cards, or the godman who tells him what to wear, how to propitiate the deities. Or you have also a very important person, particularly in this city, the bone setter, who sometimes sets bones better than a qualified orthopedic surgeon. In the villages and in far-off rural areas, you have the midwife, the dai, who still delivers babies, sometimes extremely well. The inexperienced ones, however, have been responsible for a great deal of maternal and neonatal mortalities. Now, the old traditions of medicine, their history and their development over the years, and the newer ones which have been established with them, the interlink and the intermix between these, the weaving of medical thought with changing social, cultural, religious, political climates through the ages, has given one, indeed, a very varied, rich tapestry reflecting both the medical and social history of this country. Now let me tell you about Ayurveda. Veda means wisdom, and Ayur means longevity. It means the wisdom or the knowledge for longevity or a long life. And the two pillars of Ayurveda are the Charaka Samhita and the Sushruta Samhita. They were great historic figures, great men in their own age, and even now. One quite doesn't know when they practiced, but the first mention of this was in the Bauer's Manuscript. And it is mentioned that Charaka practiced in the 5th century AD. Must tell you something about the Bose manuscript because it's interesting. Lieutenant Hamilton Bose was asked by the British government to trace the murder of a Scottish gentleman called Andrew Dagley, who was camping in the Karakoram range. And Bose camped at the edge of the Gobi Desert, and he noticed that there was a large Buddhist stupa holding the remains of a monk who must have died about 1,000 years ago. There were treasure hunters hunting there, and they offered him a manuscript, and he bought it for a pittance. It was in Sanskrit. He couldn't read it, of course. He sent it to the president of the Asiatic Society of India, who sent it to a Mr. Honle, who was a champion in Oriental languages, who translated it, deciphered it, edited it, and sent the manuscript back to Mr. Bose, who sold it to the Bodleian Library in Oxford, where it still is now. But then came further information from a Chinese manuscript that perhaps Charaka was the individual who was the companion of the great king Kanishka. And that would make him 1st and 2nd century AD. And many current Indian historians place him at about the 2nd or 3rd century BC. Be that as it may, it's not that important. But the importance is his manuscript. And I wouldn't want to go into the details of the medical text, but I want to explain the philosophy which guided Charaka. He said his manual, his companion, was based on a philosophy which was there forever. And amazingly, he said that the medical texts would certainly change with time. Incredible, I thought, that here was a man in that age and time who understood that the history of medicine was a chronicle of change. Let me tell you his philosophy. He said suffering was disease and contentment was health. And suffering could be of the body, the mind, and the spirit. And therefore, for good health, you needed a sound body, a sound mind, and a good soul. This philosophical tenet transcended his medical texts. His philosophical tenet was that man was a microsome, was just a part of nature, who was dependent, interdependent on all other living creatures. He viewed man in a holistic manner, as a microsome. He viewed man in a way where his physical, mental, and his spiritual factors or features interact with each other and interact with the external environment. That was his philosophy. As for his text, the medical text, it touched every aspect of medicine, preventive medicine, diet, exercise, clothing, touched on the spiritual aspect also, because there was a fair amount of spiritual or religious matter written within the text as well. All diseases affecting all parts of the anatomy. I just would mention that he said that there were 3 humors: Va or the wind, choler or bile, or pitta he called it, and phlegm, which he called kapha. And it was these 3 humors which were in perfect harmony, and then you had good tabiat. There were intersecting links in the body, channels within the body through which life-giving fluids ran, and these 3 humors ran through them as well. And if there was an obstruction to these humors, or if the humors were diverted in different manners or in a different way, bad health would result. I don't believe this, mind you, but I just tell you what the Charaka said. Must mention about Sushruta. He was a great surgeon, indeed a great surgeon. Devised numerous instruments. And he was known for 2 great surgeries. He was supposed to have done many surgeries, including abdominal surgeries, which seems incredible to me at that time and age. But the 2 surgeries for which he was well known for was cataract surgery and plastic surgery. In that day and age, an adulterous woman, as a punishment, would have her nose cut off. And there were many women like that. And Susruta and his disciples had a lot of practice on the reconstruction of the nose. A strange thing about surgery in Susruta's time, by about the 8th or the 9th century, following perhaps the Renaissance of Indian history after the Gupta period, the end of the Gupta period, for some reason or the other, surgery fell apart. And there was very little surgery being done by Ayurvedic physicians and surgeons. The reason seems unclear. It is possible that at that time the caste system was very strong, and perhaps there was a fear that they should not touch individuals who belong to a non-Brahmanical caste. I don't know, but this is just one of the suggestions that has been made. But surgery went on not through Ayurveds, but through barber surgeons, very much like what used to be in the West. And I must tell you a funny story here, because it's also relevant in medical history. The funny story, as often, not always, but often consists of a Parsi gentleman. His name was Mr. Kavasji. And he and his associates used to drive a bullock cart in the pay of the British Army. This was at the time of the war against Tipu Sultan, sometime I think it must be in the 1790s. And the soldiers of Tipu Sultan caught hold of him and cut off their noses. They went without their noses for a year, and ultimately they found their way to a person who was known to be a good plastic surgeon repairing noses. He was no Ayurveda. He's believed to have been an ordinary bricklayer, and he made a brilliant job of it. He cut off a flap from the forehead, turned it over, and made a good nose. Lovely details. But amazingly, the details of this surgery were witnessed by two surgeons from the Bombay Presidency. One was a man called Finlay, and another was a man called Crusoe. And they reported it in the Madras Gazette, and they reported it abroad in London in what is called the Gentleman's Magazine. And they came to the attention of a young 30-year-old surgeon called Cardew. And in 1814, this doctor performed the first nasal repair ever in the West through this particular excellent technique. He called it the Hindu repair of the nose. Now, Ayurveda and the compendium of Susruta and the compendium of Charaka found flight to numerous countries. It was translated, it was in Sanskrit, it was translated into Pahlavi and Persian. It was a Sasanian dynasty at that time, and Khusro I was on the throne. The Baghdad Caliphate translated it into Arabic. It was translated into Tibetan, into Sinhalese, into Burmese. The great Avicenna and Rhazes were the great Arab physicians during time of the Arab Renaissance. They translated it into Latin and passed it on to the West. As a matter of fact, Khusro I had his best Zoroastrian physician go down to India and spend a lot of time there learning the compendium of Charaka and Susruta. He returned after several years with many Sanskrit manuscripts to enrich Persian medicine as well. Let me now give you a brief account, just a very brief account of the importance of faith in medicine. Faith has a great deal to do with medicine. Even today, the faith between a doctor and the patient, the faith that a patient has in prayer, the faith that a patient has in a particular holy site. It's very common in India. You have, for example, Haji Ali, and you have, for example, Durgas in the north, and you have, for example, the temples in the south. And all over the country, where people go and pray for health, for keeping health, and for restoring health. It's an amazing thing, and one mustn't really poo-poo that at all. It has been there from ancient times, even from old Persian times. There is, for example, the lines in a Zoroastrian prayer, perhaps written close to 800 BC or about that, which says, O Sapitma Zarathustra, of all the healers in the world, of those who wield the knife, of those who use the herb, those that pray and those that heal through incantation are the best because they deal with the very source of disease. So it has been there for times immemorial. The temple of Asclepius, Lourdes in the West, where they've said miracles which cannot be explained by medical science. How does faith act? It is now that Western science has come to know the connection between the mind and the body. The mind-body complex, which in theory was recognized in the Charaka Compendium several millennia ago. How does the mind-body complex act? Current knowledge says, and this is how science works it out, that faith acts through the mind, which acts through the neuroendocrine system, which orchestrates and conducts the immune system of the body, gearing it to help in the healing process. So faith in India particularly is an extremely important feature for Tabiat. I'd like now to compare very briefly Ayurvedic medicine and Western medicine. Both have their moorings in philosophy. In fact, though Hippocrates may be called the father of medicine, it was Pythagoras, the mathematician, the geometrician, who left Greece because of the tyranny of Polycrates and went and founded a school on the southern coast of Italy called the Italic School, a school of philosophy. It was there that medicine really, in truth, began. Ayurveda, I have told you the philosophic moorings as well. Note the spiritual aspect and the philosophic moorings of Ayurveda. Both claim to be holistic. Ayurveda was, and I don't know, probably is holistic. Western medicine claims to be holistic, but I don't think it really is. In fact, it is being increasing compartmentalized into small sections. Doctors looking at small parts of the body. Specialists, super specialists, super duper specialists. Knowing more and more of less and less. Till a Vizaka said they know everything about nothing or next to nothing. Ayurveda, or the Indian traditional system of medicine, is cheap. The other is expensive. One is dependent on herbs and leaves and from the vegetable kingdom in the main, and also metals. The other is dependent on many other aspects found in nature and made in the laboratory as well. I am loath to admit that till the late 1890s and even 1900s, from the point of view of therapy, Ayurveda had more to offer than Western medicine. What did Western medicine have in the 1900s? It had digitalis for the heart. It had salicylates for fever. It had quinine for malaria. It had cinchona. It had colchicine for gout. It believed in purging, in sweating, and in bloodletting. And many a great individual has met his end through endless bloodletting practiced in Western medicine. Ayurveda had a host of remedies for symptoms, if not for major diseases, which was of help to man. But then after the 1900s, there was a change. The change was related to the spirit of scientific inquiry that seized the West. This spirit of scientific inquiry started with the Renaissance, with Vesalius dissecting and proving what the human anatomy really was, and destroying the very myths, the many myths that Galen had taught over 1,000 years. And this scientific inquiry first led to a great advance in the natural sciences, and then later on in the medical sciences as well. So that today, Science and technology have completely changed the face of medicine, and medicine is capable of performing miracles which we would have thought impossible 75 or 100 years ago. But then what happened to Ayurveda? I'm afraid it went into a maya. It went to sleep. I'm not quite sure why. Some say it was the British that was responsible for it because they suppressed Ayurveda and promoted Western medicine. I don't believe that for a moment. I think for a spirit of scientific inquiry, you need a certain social, cultural, and political milieu. And I can't help feeling that perhaps it was that which was absent at that time in the history of India. Another important consideration is Ayurveda, by and large, has few side effects. Strong as Western medicine is, it has quite a number of dangerous side effects. It has what is called iatrogenic medicine, which means physician or hospital-induced disease. And there are many such side effects of these dangerous drugs. It has also an effect on social structure. As Ivan Illich has said, it has made society dependent on medicine and on the institutions of medicine for the benefit of medicine and not for the benefit of society. And to me, it has a cultural iatrogenous, by which it means that death has to be fought to the bitter end. I'm afraid I'm guilty of all these iatrogeneses practicing in this field. I feel guilty, in a way, of having perpetrated at some time or the other all three of these iatrogeneses. On the other hand, though Ayurveda probably has none of these to complain about, I can't help feeling that the average Indian patient in India is extraordinarily submissive, bears his vicissitudes with remarkable calmness, courage, and a philosophical equanimity. It's difficult to understand why. I think he believes in eternity. He believes in his gods and goddesses. He believes in his religion. He believes never the soul was born, so the soul never will cease to be. The end and beginnings are dreams. Birthless, deathless, changeless, remaineth the soul forever. Death does not touch it, though death does enter its house, it seems. This is the philosophy, the religious belief that is buried in the collective consciousness of the Indian mind. But ladies and gentlemen, all said and done, after all I have said, all you've heard, and all you will have seen, I must say that the average Indian patient, average Indian, particularly the 70% of those who live in the villages, the so many who live in the slums, deserve a better deal. He deserves a better sanitation. He deserves clean water. He deserves better nutrition. He deserves education, electricity. He deserves to be vaccinated against diseases. Ladies and gentlemen, all said and done, he deserves the fruits of science and technology to see him through the vicissitudes of life and the dangers to health that he has. Traditional Indian medicine may be great for all purposes and did its work, But traditional Indian medicine is not going to relieve tuberculosis, which affects 1/3 of the billion people in this country. It is not going to affect people infected with HIV. It is not going to cure fulminant pneumonia, meningitis, and the numerous other diseases that pockmark the history of man. I do really think he deserves better. And I do hope you think likewise. Thank you.